like we just had our lunch.
Very rough.
Hello, Makati. Hello, world. This is Attorney Angel, and I'm your legal angel. Hi, my fellow angels. I hope you are staying safe and healthy. Sharing with you my lecture notes last year in IHL. I hope you learned something. Okay. So the subject matter is humanitarian law in armed conflict, which is the next topic on our syllabus and the next chapter on the book of Father Joaquin Bernas in Public International Law. Okay. The historical background for this week. So why is it important to discuss the historical background for IHL and for any other topic or any other subject matter that we have been discussing? It is because we won't know where we are until we understand where we've been. Okay, but just to give another amendment to this quote, it is important to study the historical background, not just to know where we are, but to also know where we are heading. So we won't know where we are and where we are headed until we understand where we have been. That is why it is very important to study history, to study what happened in the past. Okay, so let me begin with a quote from Cicero. So I know you know Cicero from your world history. Okay, according to Cicero, who lived in 106 to 43 BC, inter arma leges silent, which in English literally translates, in time of war, the laws are silent. So I don't know if you will agree with him, but for me, of course, I will agree with him in a sense, because in a sense, he was correct. Initially, there were no laws during the times of war during his time. So laws were initially absent during those times. But there were rules which attempted to limit armed combat from the time men began to fight in organized groups. Remember that. Let me just before I proceed to the next slide, may I just share with you the words of Gary Solis, who is the author of the book entitled The Law of Armed Conflict, International Humanitarian Law in War. When he said that the study of the law of armed conflict, by the way, IHL or International Humanitarian Law is also known as the Law of Armed Conflict or LOAC. He said that the study of the LOAC or IHL is not unlike building a house. So it means it's like building a house. You first lay the foundation for the structure, then you erect the framework tied to the foundation, and then finally, the outer walls and the interior rooms are constructed with a framework providing their support. So the study of the LOAC or the IHL is much the same. So going back to the historical background, as I mentioned, there were attempts to have rules or laws with respect to armed combat during the time when men began to fight in organized groups. So when did we begin to fight in groups or organized groups? When did men begin to fight in organized groups? History would tell us that it started as far back or as early as 10,000 years ago, which can be depicted in the cave art of the New Stone Age. And the art depicted several bowmen in conflict. So as you see in the picture, these are cave art during the Stone Age. There were several groups of men fighting one another, and they used bows, okay, because they don't have any other weapons yet during that time. Okay. Also, Wait, what happened? Okay. Okay. So let me just mention also that just like in my discussion of the historical background last week on international human rights law, I will be discussing with you major periods or major points in history regarding the historical background. Okay. So, okay, next. So, historians also said that a military defense system was developed as early as 3000 BC in Mesopotamia. Other historians also recorded that Gilgamesh, way back 2700 BC, in the city of Uruk, Gilgamesh had his first offensive military campaign. Okay. So if you compute recorded history, we can say that warfare came to the world at least 5,000 years ago. Okay. Next question is, do we really have the propensity to go to war? Wait, how can I remove this? Okay. Can you see the question? Okay. Maybe because if you count that warfare began at least 5,000 years ago, and in 5,600 years of written history, 14,600 wars were recorded. Imagine that. Okay. Another important point or period in history regarding war was during the time of the Romans. And they were very notorious because um, the Romans were said to have conducted unrestrained war and have committed criminal offenses, such as offenses which were said to be um, heinous, okay, including plunder, including enslavement of prisoners and their massacres, and they did not practice distinction, meaning to say, regardless of age, regardless of whether you are a child or a woman or an old person, or as we now call them, senior citizens, they killed them, they injured them. There was no distinction, and they did not recognize between combatants and non-combatants. Okay. But as we evolved during the time from which we started fighting organized groups, of course, there were developments because we have evolved from being barbarians to being civilized. So it improved as the years went by during the course of history. So in 1400 BC in Egypt had agreements with Sumeria and other states regarding the treatment of prisoners. Okay? And in Asia, in about 200 BC, a variety of Hindu texts describe numerous rules of war. So if you can see on the illustration, uh, Hindu laws of war in ancient Indian warfare were said to be the most humane and ethical by nature. The ancient Indians gave this world the concept of ambassador. Okay. And also, They have the Mahabharata, which was an epic Sanskrit poem between 200 BC to 280, and this reflected Hindu beliefs. It required that a king should never do such an injury to his foe as would rankle the latter's heart. It also decreed that one should cease fighting when an opponent becomes disabled, and that wounded men and persons who surrender should not be killed, and non-combatants should not be engaged in combat, and that places of public worship should not be molested. Okay? They also had a Hindu code of Manu, which directed that treacherous weapons such as barbed or poisoned arrows are forbidden, and that an enemy attempting to surrender or one badly wounded should not be killed. Okay. So this, you're familiar with Sun Tzu in the 6th century BC, The Art of War. I know most of you have read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. There were several versions of his book. Okay? In Sun Tzu's Art of War, it provided the strategies of war and it considered war as an art. Okay? He counseled limitations on armed conflict as well. So he said that in chariot battles, when chariots are captured, the then chariot unit commander will reward the first to capture them and will switch battle standards and flags. The chariots are mixed with ours and driven. Their soldiers are treated kindly when given care. So Sun Tzu did not suggest that these humanitarian admonitions constituted laws or even rules of war. He considered them simply as an effective means of waging war. Okay. So this began some more movement on the rules of war, um, such as in other parts of the world, in Rome. Again, in Rome, the Roman Emperor Maurice, in the late century, 6th century AD, he published Strategica. Strategica directed, among other things, that a soldier who injured a civilian should make every effort to repair the injury or pay twofold damages. Next, in Aqaba, we have the Pledge of Aqaba in 1621. Here, Muhammad's followers who committed the jihad for Islam were bound to satisfy a number of conditions in its conduct. So, here, the teaching is that if he has killed, he must not mutilate. Okay, for example, victors often cut off the right hands and left feet of the vanquished foes, so it was prohibited under the Pledge of Aqaba. Okay, we also had in history Innocent II, in which the use of the crossbow was forbidden as deadly and odious to God by the Catholic Second Lateran Council in the year 1139, and the Third Lateran Council prescribed humane treatment of prisoners of war or POW. Okay. Then, in the feudal period, during the time of knights and chivalry, okay, where when chivalry was still alive, and I don't know if you still think that chivalry is still alive nowadays. Okay, they upheld the chivalric values, as they said. Okay, they carried the principle of the duty to act honorably even in war. Okay, but they there were also doubters regarding the chivalric values if it really preserved or protected the lives and property of the people, or they just protected the lives and property of the privileged knights and the nobles. And then they plunder and kill the peasant soldiers and the non-Christian enemies and civilians. But that was a harsh view, okay? So Next, but this is an example of crimes of war committed, okay, atrocities during war. Few were able to watch the movie Braveheart, the story of William Wallace. This was starring Mel Gibson, a Scottish nationalist. Okay, he was executed because of atrocities in war. He committed violations in terms of sex, age, and religion. Okay? He was not a knight. He had no chivalric values. He was executed in 1305 after being convicted by an English court of atrocities in war, sparing neither age nor sex, monk nor nun. And his conviction was followed by the Statute of Westminster in 1279 that authorized the crown to punish soldiers for violations of the law and customs of the realm. And in 1386, Richard II promulgated the Ordinance of the Government of the Army. These decreed death for acts of violence against women and priests, burning of houses, and desecration of churches. Then, followed by Henry V in 1419, um, he or he promulgated ordinances of war as well. In 1419, he further codified rules protecting women and the clergy. Okay. So throughout the course of history, from being barbaric to being civilized, and then fighting in organized groups and having rules of war, battlefield codes also emerged. Okay. And first was in 1590 in Europe. The Free Netherlands adopted the Articles of War, and then in 1621, Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden published his Articles of Military Laws to be observed in the war, which were to become the basis for England's later Articles of War. Okay? Those English articles in turn became the basis for the fledgling United States' first Articles of War. Then the Treaty of Westphalia. In the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, this was the first treaty between warring states to require the return without ransom of captured soldiers. So such early European codes, dissimilar and geographically scattered as they were, are considered significant. Okay? They established precedents for other states or precedents for other states and raised enforcement models for battlefield offenses, such as the courts martial. So in the case of the British military, they have the British Articles of War, the British Military Law Manual. Okay. The British Military Law Manual was published in 1884. And then in the 19th century, multinational treaties began to flourish. And there were a few multilateral treaties that imposed accepted limitations on battlefield conduct with penalties for their violation. Okay, but that had to wait until the Hague Regulation, the fourth, or Hague Regulation 4 of 1907. But even then, battlefield laws would lack norms of personal accountability for crimes in combat. Okay, so with that long discussion on the historical background of international humanitarian law or the laws of war and laws of war or law of armed conflict, these are the insights that we could learn, or these are our takeaway from the historical development or historical background. That first, battlefield violations have always occurred and they continue to occur and will occur in the future. So even if we have laws, even if we have treaties and conventions, violations will still occur. Next, some violence is expected, but not all violence is permitted. That is the beauty of international humanitarian law or LOAC, because in war, there will be injured people, there will be people who will be the victims of violence, but not all violence is permitted, as you will learn in IHL. You, you will learn who must be protected under the IHL. Okay. And next, there should and will always be limits to battlefield conduct to ensure that all is fair in war. I don't know if you believe in the saying that all is fair in love and war. Okay, but as to war, it is not fair because someone wins, someone loses, and some may be powerful than the others. Okay, and it's a matter of strategy, and it's a matter of who will overpower who. Okay. And last but not the least insight is that we obey because it is the right thing to do. We obey not because there are laws, there are treaties, there are conventions with respect to war, but we obey because it is the right thing to do. So I will leave you with that um, last insight on doing the right thing to do, obeying because it is the right thing to do. Okay, so let's obey the protocols for our health and safety under the GCQ. Thank you very much for listening and for watching. I hope that you will stay healthy and safe and sane, and let us go through this together. Always pray and always remember to glorify God with a grateful heart. Thank you very much.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and follow, and hit the notification bell. This is Attorney Angel, and I'm your legal angel. Stay safe!